Welcome back, everyone, to a special Operation Media Report. This time we're talking about the state of the game as we head off on set one, essentially. I know some people would say set one may have ended when Iron Bloom came out, but I think it's a good mix in the middle there. We have the ability to see our fifth color finally get introduced, while not overwhelmingly introduce a large amount of cards in the card pool. What we'll end up doing in this video today is kind of talk about how the game has started, how it's progressing, and then kind of get into a little bit of how the meta looks and kind of brief people in who may be interested in playing the Gundam card game, who are considering it now that it's been out for a few months. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, what we can do to improve our community, and hopefully get us rolling a little bit stronger into set two, because that one is going to be a huge test of patience for everyone involved, store owners, Bandai, and us as players. So welcome to the state of the game. So let's go ahead and start off with the good. So the Gundam card game started off late last year with a demo that a few content creators and players got to attend. They were able to get hands on early on the game, provide feedback, and, kind of give Bandai their 2 cents about how this game could go. So what came out of that was that they decided to do a small beta event in March of 2025, in which players were able to sign up at their local stores. These were probably local stores that had some standing with Bandai, being what they would call bronze or silver, even gold store, meaning that they host a lot of Bandai events, they have a lot of product, and they're able to get into things like that. So for quite a few people, unfortunately not myself, I was not able to get into one due to other conflict schedules, and my store did end up getting enough to get people invested, at least to get people wanting to play the game when it debuted in July. Between March and July, there wasn't really a whole lot to go on. The Gundam card game app was launched in June, and it gave people a chance to kind of get used to the cards, see how those interacted, and give people a way to go in there. Bandai kept their campaign going on social media platforms, building up a website, providing people with some ability to see the cards as they're being revealed, putting out tutorials on how to play the game. So they did a really good job on trying to get the game on its, right foot when it launched in July. So with that being said, we also got a small list of the properties within the Gundam stuff. For those who are not familiar with Gundam, there are well over 15 different series that you can really count as different series. Well, in some respect, maybe that's not true. I know some people will say Seed and Seed Destiny should be counted as one, but there's so much change in characters and stuff. It's almost the same. Say the same that Mobile Suit Gundam and Zeta Gundam, Double Zeta Gundam should be the same one, even though they have some massive changes in. But I digress. When we started this game, we started with 5 series. We started with the original Mobile Suit Gundam, Gundam Wing, Gundam Seed, Gundam Unicorn, and the Witch from Mercury. So what ended up happening was that when the game launched in July, we started out with 4 starter decks. We started out with Heroic Beginnings, that featured Mobile Suit Gundam and the Witch from Mercury. Wings of Advance, that featured Mobile Suit Gundam. Siege Strike, which was the 4th one, in a man of order, which featured Gundam Seed. And then finally Zeon's Rush, that featured the Principality of Zeon from Mobile Suit Gundam and the Zeon Remnants from Unicorn. So we ended up getting quite a bit of a mix and match of those series with different deck archetypes. Later, we ended up getting our first booster pack set called D-Type Rising. This added a vast majority of cards to the pool. It ended up shoring up a lot of the problems that the starter decks have. I know that the Wing advanced deck was probably rated the lowest of all 4 of the starter decks, and then thanks to those cards of the booster packs, it ended up making the green cards out of that deck some of the most utilized cards in the game. In fact, quite a few big events were won because of the Wing cards out of that Heroic Beginnings. So with that being said, Bandai also had to put some stuff behind the scenes to get the game rolling on the right foot. It being 2025 and all, card games have been around for over 30 years, and there's some things that people would just assume would be in place when a game starts. You would have everything from participation packs or prize packs that you would get for compete at your local events, a judge program to ensure that the rules and questions about card rulings get answered, and some sort of tournament structure so that way we can actually have an ability to compete for things from both a local and regional into a world end. And Bandai did meet all of that. We had a judge program that launched right off the bat. In fact, some judges that came over from other games like One Piece and Dragon Ball and Digimon were able to just slide in as long as they read the Gundam rulebook and kind of got situated with that. We had 3 tiers of play. We have a local scene where local game stores can hand out participation packs or prize packs, depending on the event. We had regionals that allow people to qualify for world events. And then the world championships, which are scheduled here in March, allow players to compete for the highest prizes for, product that you can't buy and you can only win at those events. So Bandai really got us on the right foot on getting what you would consider to be normal staples of a trading card game, going with clear communication on the website and social media aspects. So for those not familiar with trading card game structures, local game stores really don't do much for players aside from provide extra participation pack and the ability to practice. So if let's say you win, 90% of your store competitions, it really doesn't matter much in the end outside of the fact that you get a better quality of a card that you can probably sell, make your deck look a little bit more flashier with them. However, competing at a regional like at Bandai Card Games Fest or the one that just happened in LA or Manila or some of these other ones, not only do you get a slightly different price support, but you also get the chance to qualify for the Worlds. Sometimes the top cut is as low as the top 16, sometimes it's top 8, depending on where you kind of go with that. You do have to travel for these, and there's no guarantees of placing well. You kind of just have to play, and you just go through a 6-round or 7-round or 8-round Swiss term, as they call it, meaning that you just get paired with someone at your level as you continue up until eventually you either lose or, you win it all. So for that being said, anyone who placed higher enough in their seeding ends up getting a world championship invite. World championships are going to be held in Japan, so meaning that players are going to have to travel to that country in order to play for the highest prize, the world championship, and gain whatever prizes that they have there. Those things are not going to be sold in retail, and so therefore you're going to have to play well in order to get those prizing to get that done. So let's move on to the community. The community has been a strength of Bandai because there's a lot of players who are familiar with their product because of One Piece. That game has really skyrocketed to the top of the charts, easily placing in 4th or 5th in overall store sales for trading card games. It kind of carries a good reputation. And Gundam kind of picked that up. There's a lot of Gundam fans out there. Since the IP has been around for almost 50 years, there's a lot of fans of a lot of different series that got involved with that. I've seen a lot of people who may have never even touched a trading card game. In fact, one of my opponents was a Gunpla or Gundam Plastic Model fan. He played it just because he was just a big fan of Gundam in general. And so it's kind of nice just to have people coming in here. Well-known content creators got in on it, and we basically have a pretty strong start for the game, and some other things which we'll talk about later. So when the game came out, we had a couple of closed events that we didn't really get to be a part of, but those content creators were able to let us know that this game was in a good spot and that they highly recommend playing it when the opportunity comes around. The beta events pretty much were sold out in my area. I'm from Northern Colorado, and if you didn't get into one event, all the other stores pretty much got you product when they could with those, but got filled really quickly with that. So invitationals and all that, I feel like Gundam has been in a good spot when it comes to just community events. Things have calmed down a little bit because the initial craze of, it's a new next shiny thing, let's see what's going on. Even with that being aside, I think even at my local store, we're still averaging like 10 to 20 players on a constant basis, depending on the time of the year and what's going on with their life. So I'm pretty happy to say that Gundam's in a good spot. I think going to set 2 will have a strong showing. With that, let's talk about the content creators. Now, I know people have mixed reaction about content creators because of all the stuff going on, but when it comes to trading card games, content creators can be some of the best resources you can have because there are people who literally dedicate their time and energy just to focus on what the game is about. So we have folks like, Egman, Universes X, Red Zone Rogue, who keep talking about these games at a high level and trying to keep people informed about, here's the events, here are the decks to play, and, releasing videos on how to play and competitive videos on like, here's one deck versus another deck, so you have an idea how those interactions work. You have competitive players like Rainnite from Rainnite Gaming and Garret from Talking Cards, with Garret to kind of give you a way to perceive this game in a way that you may not play. So when it comes to resources, content creators are some of the best ones out there to kind of put their time and energy into it, to kind of bridge the gap between people who are new to card games or might need that little step up to go from someone who does okay to someone who does amazing at them. And then there's people like Esperia who create Discord servers, and they become a hub for discussions of deck building, events, and news, and getting people to promote their own content. I would highly recommend that if your area doesn't have one, like let's say that you live in a large metropolitan area, or you have a lot of rural communities that are kind of closely adjoined, make a Discord. Get that conversation going so that way you guys can sync up events, so that way you don't have everything overlap. I mean, when you run a new type Rising event that just came out this past year, you can kind of go, okay, well, this place 10 miles away is running one this week, another one 15 miles another way. That's kind of makes it to where you don't have to, overlap. You don't have to miss out and get people invested in playing the game a little bit more, because there's an ability to play more at these higher events. And then there's people like myself and other small content creators that are just trying to keep the conversation going. I know people never even set up a Twitter or an X account, but because they're doing so well that they just want to share the news, they're building those type of social media platforms. I'm trying to make content to talk about the game, to keep the conversation going, to kind of give people a chance to look at how much this game you can get involved with. And so I'm hoping that people can keep this momentum going, because the strength of a community can push a game further than just product being flown out. And then finally, I wanted to touch on a few other things. Now, we do have local events. We do have those mid-range ones like the close combats. We have our regionals, and then we have our worlds. But for some folks, they want to keep that competitive edge. So thankfully, places like the Eagle's Nest and PPG have put together tournaments for folks to allow them to compete for more than just a couple packs. Eagle's Nest puts up booster boxes. PPG put up cash prizes. They put up a ticketing system so you can get wall prizes for games that they also sponsor. So let's say that you're playing in a sealed deck tournament and you do well, but you don't need any more Gundam product, but you want to pick up Lorcana or One Piece products and stuff, you can do that there. And that's kind of nice that we're being included in a larger TCG community as a way to kind of get people to go, oh, well, Gundam looks pretty cool. Kind of one of those give and take sort of things. So the last thing I want to touch on is that in terms of community resources, there's a ton out there. Egman, EX Burst have sites on deck building, tournament results like TCG Top Decks, lets us have information about how well a deck's performing with which cards, because cards can make a difference. You might need 2-1 card and it turned out you need a 3 to make it work better. Kind of see some of those correlations in place to help you do that. We have people who constantly keep track of the markets, like Magical Meta and all those guys, just to give you an idea of how much cards are worth, so you can trade with people on more kind of TCG player, for good or for bad. Kind of lets you know what things are going market wise. It's nice to have that information on the tip of your fingers rather than trying to make a guess at what that stuff is. So we have a great amount of tool sets that the community provides, and I'm pretty happy that there's a lot of people who are investing their time and efforts to make apps, databases, and websites for us to use. So I don't want to drag this out too long on the good side, because I know a lot of people also want to talk about, oh, well, about this or that. We'll get to that. So with that, we'll leave that for there for now and see how things improve when set 2 is done. And hopefully things got better from, the good ground going. Okay, so with that being said, let's talk about the bad. It goes without saying that Bandai completely misunderstood the demand for their game. And to be fair, there's a lot of things to consider with that. As someone who has worked in the TCG development group like myself, granted not for a long amount of time, I still have an insight about how this goes. You usually spend 2 to 3 years in card development, meaning that you're just trying to figure out how the cards look, to logistics of how they play, to testing decks out, to testing card strength, to make it like all that takes time. It takes about 2 years. You're usually testing with 1 to 6 sets, and by then you don't know if your card game is going to succeed. So you have to kind of gauge interest on that. I'm not entirely sure how Bandai did that metric, considering how well One Piece sold, and I don't know if they took that with a grain of salt with how well their other games did with like Digimon and Fusion Worlds and all that. I know Lorcana had a large amount of problems, so that should have been a clear indicator, but I digress. I will say that there was a huge mess up when it came to the starter deck events. I know some stores were able to get plenty of stuff on their first wave, and some had to wait till their second wave before they can get enough allocation for their players. Booster boxes, it kind of depended where you went. I know some stores that had no product week 1, and I know there were some other places that got plenty of product. My local store was able to kind of keep product in until about 6 weeks into the game, although they were in small waves. So, it kind of made things kind of a mixed bag for folks when they're coming into this game. This demand also created a huge surge in cards. Why? Well, here's the reason. The way that most TCG go in terms of how the strengths of a card goes, that the higher rarity of a card usually indicates that it could potentially be a card that can swing the game and be very powerful stuff. So for example, in the green colors, there's a Wing 0 card that did really well. It has the ability not to be blocked and does white square damage, and it's really hard to take out. And, for a game that doesn't have a lot of removal and your units are the source of winning the game, it ended up, the card single wise was like $40 in its first 2 weeks. And then eventually dipped down when, prices finally calmed down. But for those folks that were competing at high-end events, were trying to win product and stuff, they had to cough up that $45. And thankfully now it's under 10, so which means that finally demand finally got up at the end of set 1. But I'm hoping at set 2, we won't have to deal with much, because I think 2 things are going to go in favor for that. One, there's less hype for the game now that's been out, so people who wanted to try the game are here to stay, and those who aren't are already gone. And 2, we have League of Legends Riftbound coming out, which is a new shiny card games, which I'm hoping that'll take a lot of resellers out of the game. But needless to say, Bandai did mess up quite a bit when it came to allocation on that, and I'm not too positive that set 2 is going to be good, because again, we're looking at a 3-month window from when you print a card out to shipping it, and then can distribute it and get into the stores. It can take upwards from 3 months to as little as 8 weeks. So we'll see. I mean, got a week before set 2 comes out, so I'm really hoping that we'll take care of it. Now, on the other hand, starter decks fall into a separate category, because so there's a set amount of cards. Bandai, if you're not aware, makes it to where your starter decks contain 2 of a starting card, sometimes 3, and maybe sometimes 4 of a card. So you don't even get the full play set of a card. So that forces a player to buy a minimum of 2 of starter deck to get a play set of every single card. So with that being said, most of our major decks at this point require cards from those starter decks, and because of the supply and demand problems, starter decks were MSRPing for around $14 where you were at, and instead being sold, I think at the end of set 1, we're still looking at $30 to $40 for like Heroic Beginnings, which contains some of the more powerful cards in blue color, to $35 for some of the green cards from Wings of Advance. And same with the Siege Strike deck, where we have the Ale Strike and a couple of other cards that people need for making those decks work. So unfortunately, there's not a lot that we can really do about that. It's a Bandai problem, not a player problem. So let's talk about Premium Bandai. For those not aware, Premium Bandai is a site that is an official storefront for Bandai. Here you can buy things like attire, you can buy special items like Gunpla and accessories. And now they're starting to sell things for the card games on there. So one of the things that did come out earlier this year was the fact that they're selling premium accessory kits. They're not really anything too important in regards to just playability of the game, but they are something that collectors would want, such as, nicer maps, alternative art cards that you can't get from anything but the premium accessory kits, to, things like some collector stuff like the boxes and stuff. So to be fair, there's some collectability, and people did want, especially when Gundam Wing is celebrating its 30th anniversary. They kind of undersold how popular the game was, and not so much Gundam Wing's popularity. And the fact that they started with a set amount and not a print order kind of made things go bad. Like bots bought out a lot of the product immediately, not very much for folks to get. We're in our 3rd wave now, and I think Bandai finally got their lesson learned, but still, the fact that a lot of people are just reselling the game just to make a profit kind of sucks. And the fact that in the US, Australia, and Japan, the only way you can get these premium accessory kits were through Premium Bandai kind of made a lot of friends. Made a lot of people and players kind of resentful in the fact that they couldn't get something that they would have loved to have to play with for their game. Bandai's communication. So this is the problem that we have with card games in general. If you're not Wizards of the Coast and you don't know everything, or you're not Disney Arcana and you don't have a contract with a single vendor, you run into some issues. So Bandai doesn't do a great job in the fact that they monopolize some folks for their services, like Bandai's Card Games Fest, which is run by one group, but then they utilizes core TCG for another, and then there's a mix of people that organize their events for them. So they don't really give you very much in terms of even who's running them unless you go to the main site. So if you go see something on a post like social media saying, hey, go to our website to find the website of the guy running our stuff, it kind of makes you go scratch your head and be like, well, why is this the case? So I think Bandai could make it a little bit more streamlined in the sense that we need something that goes, hey, click on this link to register for this regional qualifier. It would go a long ways because we need to kind of get people who are not familiar with that product to get in there. And someone who's new to Bandai, it was kind of frustrating kind of to figure out like, okay, I have to register with a third party to sign up for your regional. Why don't you guys just have like a single sign-in account or something like that and let them just focus on running the event when registration can be handled through a single party. So, and then let's talk about some of the community problems that we saw with set one that was kind of discouraging. With supply shortages, it's a nature of capitalism and people looking out for themselves, making that cash. We do see that scalp incomes thing. If you're not familiar, this is where people take an item that's highly sought after, buy it all up and try to resell at a higher mark so that way they can make money off of it. And this was running rampant at this set one. I know people who were buying up multiple starter decks at MSRP and selling them at double or triple the price. Same thing with the new type stuff. I think even the premium accessory kits that, sorry, not premium accessory, but just the standard accessory kits were just like dice and sleeves and stuff. We were trying to flip those, which, made it difficult for folks to get on there. I've even seen it not even sit with the players. Some stores were trying to get in on this. This is kind of the problem that we have with internet access is that sometimes people see something that they could just sell themselves. Wasn't very often, but it was at least visible enough that where people would post on Facebook or Reddit or Twitter that stores would cancel starter deck events. So that way they could just take the starter decks at MSRP and sell them at 4 times the profit, just so that way they can get the profit and not have a reseller do it. And it's like, come on, guys, if you want this game to grow, you want to have a consistent player base, you can't be undercutting your players. That's not cool. I'm really glad this store I'm at doesn't really do that. Yes, they mark it up, but we're talking like $5 or $10 more. It's like something that it's okay for us to play because they got to make money too. I get that. And at least they're not trying to, exploit player base to get that margin. And then let's talk about something else you may have heard about. So if you're not familiar with, what happened in Dallas, is that was a huge community event, and Bandai Card Games Fest wasn't just Gundam. You had Uni X, you had 2 Dragon Ball games, you had One Piece, you had Digimon, you had Gundam. And, it's hard to say if they were in players, but the problem with this is that Bandai only sold certain commemorative items for those games at that event. And there's a whole thing out there about how people were cheated at places online to bad behavior to people just buying stuff to flip it just to pay for their trip. And that wasn't cool. And I think that as a community, we got to hold people accountable for that. We need to talk about the fact that it created a chain reaction, Dallas, from the fact that day 1 problems filled into day 2s where it caused issues from people trying to even get into the event. We had such a great opportunity to have a good experience, but it got ruined by the fact that we had so many bad actors just ruining the event. And again, I'm not putting that out of players. I don't even know if there were players trying to scalp it. I'm sure there might have been some, but without evidence, I can't really say, who really was behind the bad actors and that. So I'm hoping Bandai will fix that in the future. They said they were going to try to look into it, especially the fact that they do have just one vendor locked in for the United States Bandai Card Games Fest for both Dallas and Vegas. All right. So where do we kind of go from here, right? We've talked about how good the game is. We've talked how bad the game is. What's on here? In a week we have set 2 coming out in full capacity with, the Clan Unity starter deck and the dual impact booster boxes. So there's a couple of things that we need to take a look at. Short term, this is going to be a little rough for everyone because again, there's probably not going to be a whole lot of product. It's going to come in waves like it did in set 1. And we're just going to have to ride that wave until it gets there. Until set 3, this is going to be a problem. Usually set 3, we kind of know who's in and who's out, how much product the store needs, and, we're going to get there. Bandai has put out that they're working on supply issues and getting them fixed for sets 1 through 4 for the starter decks. At least they're reprinting them in Japan. I assume that they're going to get to the States at some point because a lot of new players are going to be needing those cards that come out of those sets, and singles right now aren't terrible for a good chunk of cards. Like I said, the Wing Zero card was at $45 at launch, and now it's down to 10. So you may be able to get the singles you need for a reasonable price without having to spend a ton of money just to make those decks competitive. Bandai's look like they're fixing a lot of the print order stuff when it came last weekend, when we had seen the Iron Blooded Orphans premium accessory kit, Gundam Assemble sets for Iron Bloom and Clan Unity. Those are still open for sale, meaning that they're doing print orders. Which, by the way, don't hesitate on those. You think that you have time to buy them, then you find out soon enough that they close, and then you're out of luck for trying to get those aside from local game stores or resellers. So if you're interested in those products, head over to Premium Bandai and go pick up those, accessory or assemble kits, just so that way you don't lose out on it. And then on the information side, we all have to do a little bit better. Content creators, judges, official channels need to do a better job on getting news and updates out quickly, especially when there's questions about cards. The judge program has done a fantastic job at least getting us some information. The rules updates happen pretty much on a weekly, bi-weekly basis to clear up some muddied language. And content creators have been doing a great job. I know that there was folks like the Art Samurai who comes and brings in a lot of Bandai news and lets us know about stuff. And I'm just hoping things will get a little bit better. So if you're trying to figure out how you can get this game going a little bit better for your local scene, because it really takes a village, that saying really applies here. We all have to kind of clean up around our home area and make it as welcoming as we can. So I know it's a pain, but try not to give into the fear of missing out or FOMO. Resellers are just there just to make profit. They're not there to really help you guys out. And unless you really need something, don't bother with that. I would check, your local areas. And we're looking at Target, Walmart, now GameStop selling GDO2, this dual impact boosters. So there might be a little bit more product around. So don't immediately flock to a reseller just to buy product. Wait a week or two, see how things go, and you might be better off. You could save yourself, $40 to $50 compared to what you would pay for, which helps you in the long run. Support fair stores and honest sales. There's people who are selling your stuff, but it might be because they already have a full place and they're just trying to sell. Maybe they have a fifth or sixth of a legendary rare that they can do to help offset some of the costs. Not everyone's out to get at users trying to recoup some of the money that they invested in the game. Promote the game on social media. I can't stress it enough that people think that you have to be a content creator just to promote this game. Don't. Tell about how good of a time you had. Tell, if you had like 24 people show up to your, dual impact event, let people know so that we can know this game is alive and well. Just hashtag, Gundam Card Game, or do something just to show people that this game's fun and it's a good community to be a part of. And at your local shops, if someone's due, take them on your wing, show them how fun the game is, show them a cool trick. Get them invested into it so that way they know that they want to come back, and then you guys can have more people to play with and increase your skill level. Help them find events if they're not aware of. That's the one thing that I know I had issues with navigating the Bandai TCG app. So, there's a lot more we could do with that. Okay, so let's talk about the meta. So for those who are not familiar, the meta is a term that's usually used to talk about, the most consistent decks that are winning the most amount of games, that have been kind of polished to a well-machined oil machine that kind of makes it to where there's not a lot of woodwork for cards to adjust, and then you just have to be consistently good at playing them. So, right now, Gundam kind of supports every deck in some form or fashion. We have tempo decks that focus on controlling the flow of the match by making efficient trade and maintaining a strong field of units. So those will be the decks that's like, hey, I'm going to pump this character up, or I'm going to be able to remove this unit, or I'm going to be able to move, take a hit and not lose a unit, but still protect my shield. So there's a few of those going around. Aggressive decks, meaning that you're aggressively attacking the shields, where you play a lot of low-end units, but multiple of them. So instead of playing one unit that might have 4 strength, you might be able to go away with playing 3 units with 2 strength, but because there's so many of them, your opponent can't deal with them all, and you just overwhelm them with sheer numbers. You have control decks, or ping decks, as players say. So instead of dealing direct damage to folks, you just play a card, you deal damage, so that way you preserve your character's health, and a lot of cards will allow you just to do that by just simply playing them or attacking something else. And that goes a long ways, because you don't have to invest your own characters to do that. And finally, we have long-range decks, which basically you hold your ground, you mitigate the damage that you can take to yourself. So that way, when you play your high-end unit, it has huge warping effects. We see this with like the Wing Zero card, where you spend time just to pup defenses, get more resources, and then you play a card that pretty much can wipe out an opponent's field because it's so big. Or you play the Gundam Unicorn, where you can play one unit that's a decent stat, make an attack or a trade, and then you blow it up for a better version of it and attack for a second time for no cost to you aside from that and the pilot that you pair it with. So the Gundam card game is actually doing pretty well, because in some card games you only have one or two decks that only perform well at the high-end level, which is a bit boring. But in this game, there's quite a bit. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the time that we get out with set 1. You look at what happened in the Los Angeles regionals, there was a lot of color combinations. Even the new purple color made a scene there, and we had a term in Manila not too long ago, the same thing. It's, nice to see that you can, if a deck doesn't suit you well, you can find something else and still be successful with it. It's a good feeling to have, knowing that you invest time in this game and there's something that you could play as a player that can really resonate with your play style. So at top events, we really saw more or less these color combinations. We saw green-white that features the Gundam Wing cards with blockers from the white set that did well. Blue-red has been called Cyber New Type. Builds resolved around cards that allow you to rest cards and then hit them with damage when you play your characters. Blue-green saw a Xeon or 1 year rush, where they play a lot of one cards for the first 2 turns, maybe the third one, and then coming out with some good mid-range cards on turn 4 and 5 that got past defenders and just vanished off your opponent. And then you have blue-white blockers, where, all they did was they block with their lower-end cards and swing with their high-end cards, and, made some really good tempo changes. I will say this, though. Blue was the most favorite colored in the set. In fact, blue had every color combination show up in the finals, and the only thing that kind of stopped it was the green-white deck, just because it just did that end game just a little bit better. But this also meant that there was 2 cards that had the most playability. You had Armor Alert Ray for a Mobile Suit Gundam, with the RX-78 being the most played cards, because Armor's effect's pretty, I wouldn't say broken, but it's a little overpowered. He can have the ability to make a character on your side rest, and a lot of cards don't get to use their effect when they're rested, so sometimes he can swing by you and you can't do anything about it. And then you have the Hero Yui with the Wing Zero Gundams that have some pretty fun abilities, to where not only does it give resources, but it can attack ready units. You have Narita Cruz with her Kshatriya and Unicorn Gundam, which allowed her to deal damage and get first strike off. And then you have those Xeon cards like Sharaz and the Bola and the Zaku's that, they kept churning out cards just because it blows up, it can deploy another one, and could get behind blockers too. We have the Unicorn cards where you can play with Banage or Link to draw cards, smack someone, and then bring out a better version of it for no cards. So we had a lot of ways to kind of look at this game. And one of the other cards that kind of seemed to make a splash was like the Kira Yamato cards that played with the various strikes that you kind of saw in the green-white package sometimes, to the blue-white package, to the red-white package. So he became a pretty powerful staple to help balance up the game and change the tempo and make the game swing in your favor. So we'll do a video on those decks later, but, to give you an idea, we've had a lot of players come out with a lot of fun combos and concept, and that was just set 1, with just 5 series. There's more cards coming out next week, with purple getting some interesting cards coming out with a recursion ability, meaning that you can play cards from your discard pile or get cards from your discard pile, making it to where just because you lose a unit or a pile doesn't mean they're gone for the rest of the game. In fact, that's more worrisome in some ways than just worrying about a unit that can just board wipe. So, we got a lot of ways to go in terms of this game. We've only touched on 5 of the IPs. We've got 5 new ones coming in. We still are missing Gundam Bigelow, Gundam Hathaway, G Gundam. We still got a lot of series to cover. And in fact, now that we're getting to these secondary sets, you may only see 1 or 2 cards from your series floating in here and there. So, needless to say, you might have to wait for some of those cards. I know I'm waiting for some of the Endless Waltz and second versions of some of the Gundams from Gundam Wing to come out. And we'll have to wait for those, unfortunately, as time goes on. With that, I hope you guys enjoy your last week of set 1. I'm hoping that, everyone gets to enjoy the cards they've been playing with, and then get ready for next week, where we get a whole new set of cards. We'll have a new set of high-end meta cards, and hopefully get this set of players in to kind of give us some more things to look forward to as we continue playing this game. And with that, have a great weekend, and we'll catch you all next time.